Hi, and welcome to Live Loved. I'm Julie Wright, and I'm here with my co-host, Amy Hirsch. And today we are going to be exploring how women are being called to rise up, to awaken, to arise and shine, and look at the counterfeit of the enemy at the same time. You know, Amy, we've been discussing this idea that arise and shine, and women are finding their voice, and we have more of a voice and a choice right now than we ever have in culture or history, really. And we're seeing this movement of women awakening both within the church, in culture, and yet at the same time, whenever there is a movement of God, there's usually a counterfeit of the enemy that happens at the same time. And so
Yes.
look into Esther today and give some parameters and guardrails to what it means for a woman to rise up in her identity, her calling, and her purpose.
Yes. Definitely, Julie. I mean, to use your voice, but in a way that is respectful and dignified. You know, she didn't back down from talking and calling out evil, right?
Yeah,
At a
yeah,
time where she was called to, like we discussed in our last episode, she was called for such a time as this, which is the truth for all of us as believers. We are called for such a time as this. So we were born for
yeah,
a purpose that God already decided before we were ever formed, to
yeah,
speak out, to help influence the culture, to advance his kingdom. And
yeah.
so I think we want to further our talk, continue our talk on the book of Esther and what you've written in your book, Julie. We are going through Esther. Actually, in your book, you go through the stories of nine, is it 8 or 9 women of the
Nine biblical
Bible?
women. Yep.
9 women. Oh gosh.
Yep.
If you guys haven't gotten this book yet, I highly recommend it. Julie takes us through the stories of 9 biblical women and how the Lord used them in his story of redeeming Eve, of redemption. So anyway, going back to the story of Esther, kicking off this talk of respect, because Esther did this so well.
Mhm.
Julie, I just want to launch by reading this part of your book that I think is a great starting point for us. You
Sure.
say, respect is a beautiful thing. Respect is becoming a rare thing.
Mm.
Respectful people conduct themselves with dignity and treat others with value. They are magnificent showcases of integrity and honor. Respectful people are strong enough to restrain themselves from extreme anger or self-pity. I think that's a really good point right now. They are courageous enough to boldly and graciously speak the truth. They are secure and unthreatened by others' disapproval.
Mm.
Finally, because respectful people's words are guarded by integrity, they can relate and communicate confidently without fear of reprisal.
Mm.
Esther did this really well, didn't she?
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you look at her story and her example and her approach and what she does do and what she doesn't do.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, I imagine the situation, or I can just put myself in that situation. If I have to go to my husband and I have an issue, I disagree with him. And, you know, this wasn't just a disagreement about where to go for dinner, right? Her husband had done something and foolish to the extent that her life was at stake. People were
Mhm.
going to die because of the decision that he had sort of been manipulated or moved into. And I
Julie,
just,
for those, I just want to back up just a minute. For
sure,
those who
yep,
haven't really heard the story of Esther, can you just lay it out in a simple way for us, just to kind of
sure.
make sure that we all are starting
Yeah,
from the
so we're
same
up at
starting
the
point?
same point. Yeah,
Yes,
that's,
yes.
thank you, Amy. That's great. So Esther is the queen of Persia, and her husband has been tricked into or moved into signing a decree to annihilate the Jews. And so, and Esther's Jewish, and she hasn't told him that she is Jewish at this point. And
Mhm.
so there's a personal crisis, a family crisis, and a national crisis. And so her uncle comes to her uncle Mordecai, just imploring that she intervene and go to the king. And she says that she can't. You have this whole thing with protocol in the kings, and she can't just go unsummoned. To go unsummoned, the penalty is death unless the king lowers his scepter. If she comes in and he lowers his scepter, then she doesn't die. Otherwise, it's kind of like off with your head,
Right,
And,
right.
there's great risk at her approaching the king. And she informs them that she has not been summoned by him for over 30 days.
Mhm.
And so she knows she is risking her life if she goes into the king's court unsummoned. She has no idea how he's going to respond. Is he going to be put on the spot? Is he going to respond in pride and having to say, she doesn't know. And so last week we talked, she has everyone pray and fast for 3 days. And then she decides she's going to approach the king. And with those final words, if I perish, I perish. And she submits and surrenders herself to God's plan and approaches the king. And so picking up there, I just think about how she could have approached the king. The Bible says she put on her best gowns. That was respectful. If she's going to show up and kind of confront the king or approach him unsummoned, she does so in a way that at least she doesn't disrespect him, even with her appearance or her approach. But I think about, if I needed to confront someone, a leader, or confront my husband or a friend, how often my approach is not necessarily respectful. Because it's what she could have done. I call it, she could have barged in need first, like just emotional, right? Oh my gosh, what were you thinking? She could have burst the doors open. My people are going to die because of you. She could have accused him. She could have come in as a basket case, just weeping. Oh, no, I'm going to die, and he's just like, should I kill her or should I just send her to the hospital, or something?
Right.
She could have approached with condemnation. And as we see the story play out, we see her approach him with so much respect and dignity in a way that does not embarrass him, does not belittle him, does not shame him publicly, but she approaches and she invites him to a banquet. So her public approach is honor and honorable to him. And she sets him up to be able to say yes to her request to the banquet without losing dignity or respect in his public sector as king. And, there's some strategy that we can learn from that.
Yeah. The strategy of respect and honor to be able to get to a desired point in an argument or a conversation. There's so much to extract from Esther, to your point that you were just talking about. She didn't react out of emotion, which, let's be honest, as women, I think that sometimes is our first reaction. We're led by our emotion. We're emotional creatures. I can't tell you all the times that I've responded to things first, emotion first, without, really praying and seeking God and thinking things through. I guess I'm really in awe over her ability in the face of being killed and her entire people group being killed. She remained level-headed.
Yeah.
She remained level-headed enough that she pushed into God, asked others to pray, received the strategy, and then remained clothed literally with that dignity and respect.
Yeah.
to be able to confront evil,
Yeah.
remaining composed,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It's
And
pretty
by the
easy.
way, not bitter. Just, we could talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Because if you think of Esther's situation, she was, for lack of a better word, kidnapped,
Yeah.
brought into this situation that she didn't choose, forced
Mhm.
to marry this king.
Yeah.
There were benefits, I'm sure, to being the
Yeah.
queen and, you know,
Spa
get
treatments.
the spa treatments, beauty treatments. You have,
Yeah.
the jewels of the kingdom at your disposal, all of that. But I put myself in her situation and I think, gosh, there's so many. I might have been bitter.
Yeah.
Now my freedom's gone. I'm forced to marry this guy.
Mhm.
I might have been bitter with him, and I
Yeah.
might have been bitter with God.
Yeah.
She had already lost her parents. Her life was not at all going in a way that we would say was probably the
Maybe her
way she,
self-plan.
yes,
Her
yes.
her self-direction was obliterated, hijacked, and now
Right.
she's in a whole scenario where she doesn't have a whole lot of freedom or a lot of choices. And what I love is we see Esther just press into trusting and obeying God,
Mhm.
serving God's purposes with
Mm.
her life instead of her own.
Yeah,
And
she was
the
fully
surrender.
yielded.
Yeah.
She was fully yielded to God's plans and purposes for her life. It's remarkable when you really
Really
take the
is.
time to think about it.
Yeah, she lets go and she surrenders to being used by God in whatever way, in whatever capacity he has for her. And nowhere in her story do we see her fight that. We
Mhm.
don't see her in a tug of war with God and for, God might be putting me here for this and calling me to this, but I really want this instead. We don't see that tug of war. What
Mm-mm.
we really see with Esther is a submission to God, this
Mm.
surrender. And when we talk about submission to God, at least, it's just letting God drive the car, letting him be in charge,
Mhm.
following his lead, surrendering to his purpose. And God did bring Esther there for an incredible purpose. Her uncle says, maybe you've been brought to the palace for such a time as this. Esther was brought to intervene for her people. She saves the nation of Israel, and she saves, in many ways, and changes the nation of Persia. She saved them from great sin against Israel, which would have been costly for the
Mhm.
nation of Persia. So we see this little orphan girl who actually changes the world and becomes the most powerful woman in the world of the most powerful nation. I mean, but she did it not by striving. She didn't try to get there. It wasn't selfish ambition or vain conceit that gets her there.
Yeah.
It was just this surrender to the purposes of God and a willingness to trust God and obey him, and with whatever the outcome was. She didn't know that's where this was going.
Right.
We have the benefit of hindsight to be like,
Mhm.
oh, here she comes. All she knew, to your point, was I just lost my freedom. I just became, I'm an owned woman, I just became property of the king. And she didn't know that was for a purpose at that time,
Mhm.
but she trusts God's direction in her life.
Yeah.
It is remarkable, you
And
know.
so, what do you think, Julie, we can extract from her story and the way she reacted? How can we apply that to our own lives
Mhm.
when faced with, situations that are
Yeah.
unfavorable to us or people who are unfavorable to us? What can we learn from her?
Yeah. Well, as we opened our podcast today and we talked about the counterfeits, I think what we learn is there's two motives and two movements at hand. And if we're not careful, we can get out of one ditch and fall into the other. And, there's this idea of women finding their voice and their value and embracing their purpose in such a way that they're coming out of um, abusive or diminishing roles and places and standing up and kind of that arise and shine idea and awakening to who God made them to be. I mean, that's the whole purpose of Live Loved, right? Learn to live
Sure.
loved out of our value and identity in Christ. But the false one is this rising up in pride or rising up in selfishness. And I've seen this at work because some of the language and some of the messaging can sound very similar, but they're very different in motive, which then leads to them being very different in how it plays out and where the target, where it's going. When we rise up in that pride and that selfishness, what we end up seeing is women becoming disrespectful or demeaning or demanding. And I mean, I've seen this at play where I'm not going to come under false submission or subjugation. And just for our listeners' sake, we're going to unpack what biblical respect and submission is over the coming weeks in different women's stories, because I think there's such a misunderstanding of what it means to be respectful. But we see women coming out of this thing of, you're not the boss of me, and I don't want to be controlled or diminished, or I'm not being valued. And women can do that with this fighting spirit that then becomes disrespectful. They're trying to fight their way out of something or fight their way into something. I've seen this a lot with leadership too, where, there's striving and driving. There's kind of clawing your way, that visual of I'm going to claw my way to the top, or I'm going to, have my dukes up, and everything is a fight. And that is not what God calls women to either. That is not respectful womanhood. And so I think what we see from Esther is she does stand up. She uses her voice. She uses her influence, but she stays within this protective guardrails of respect and dignity.
Yeah.
And there was self-respect in that, and there was respect for others. There was still respect for authority. There was respect for her husband, and there was respect for him as king and for the rules of the nation she lived in. She still, yes, on one hand, you could say she broke the rule by entering, but she still did it respectfully in a way that he was able to lower his scepter and give her a place to appeal to him.
Yeah, I love Julie, just making me think of the language she used when she asked the king for a banquet for her and Haman. And let me just read to you from Esther 8:5, because you'll see just her respectful language that she used. She says, "If it pleases the king," she said, "and if he regards me with favor and thinks it the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman devised and wrote to destroy the Jews and all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family?" Just the respect, in this language that she uses, that sets her people free from destruction. I don't know, it just really stands out to me.
Well, even that she started with, if it pleases the king.
Yes.
I mean, she acknowledged that he's king. She's trying to please him,
Mhm.
not in some subservient way, but in a respectful way. You know, I feel like our culture is throwing the baby out with the bathwater
Mm.
in this whole idea of that, well, women aren't supposed to, I don't have to try to please anybody. And no, it's like, we're not talking about people pleasing and groveling for value. We're
Mhm.
talking about just being respectful
Mhm.
and being willing to treat other people with the honor and respect that we want to be treated with.
Mhm.
And, I just, if it pleases the king, here's what my petition is. Here's what my request is. You know, you mentioned this earlier where in the book, but one of the things is when we are respectful and honoring, we don't have to feel nervous, tense, or scared to
Mhm.
confront, to call out things, to have the hard conversations. I feel like sometimes part of that fear of having those conversations is because we do them passive aggressively, or we do them with shame, or we're going to say something we regret. When you have those guardrails of love and respect, I'm going to be loved, speak the truth in love. I'm going to be honoring. I don't have to be afraid of what I have to say. I can go have the hard conversation because it's in that speak the truth in love.
Mhm.
And, we have a lot of people who are like, just speak the truth. Well, truth without love, they say, is brutality. Love
Oh.
without truth is dishonesty. There's a saying about that, but it's like,
Hmm.
do both.
Hmm.
Be truthful, but be loving and stay in that place of respect, because then, you can stand secure in who you are and how you presented that.
I think now is the time where culture needs respect, a
Mhm.
return to respect. I mean, you think
Yeah,
of all the division that we've continued to go through, and that
yeah,
we've been through over the last 3 years. And it's just, we see, emotions running high and mouths being loosed to really
yeah.
tear into one another in a way that
Hmm.
is just so, I think, devastating,
Yeah.
to unity,
Hmm.
to fellowship, to just
Constructive.
common
Yeah.
dialogue and
Yeah.
discourse, respectful discourse. Where has that gone?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and I think as you're saying that, our culture has said that being disrespectful is powerful.
Mm.
Like if I want to be powerful, I can walk into a room mouth first and just demand my own way and spew my own truth and, slice and dice people. And I mean, that is not power. That is
Mhm.
actually a lack of self control,
Yeah.
the lack of restraint. I think the most powerful people are people who can speak the truth in love, who can have the hard conversation, who can disagree and still not get baited by either pride or shame.
Mhm.
What we see so much in dialogue today is you see pride, you see people just calling names or demeaning, instead of like, just stand up, say who you are and what you stand for and why you believe what you believe. I
Mhm.
mean, now I'm kind of leaning into politics a little bit, but I'm like, I don't care which side you're on. Could somebody just stand up and respectfully share your vision, share your convictions,
Mhm.
share why you believe something is the right course of action
Mhm.
without regressing into this place of, and the other side are just,
Mm.
can't, I mean, just, it's like,
A,
can we,
B, or C. Yeah.
yeah, quit the name calling, quit the whatever. I mean, yeah, disagree. If you have something to say that you believe somebody else is doing something destructive, say it. But we do, I don't know, when you add disrespect what ends up happening is people lose respect for you. Disrespectful people are disrespected by other people. That's, you lose respect. You don't gain respect by being disrespectful. You gain respect by showing the self-control to speak the truth in love and be respectful. If you plant corn, corn grows. If you want respect, plant respect. Little law of science, follow the science, right?
I think one last thing, though, that I find very, I guess, interesting about this story is too, she called out evil. She targeted the person where the evil derived from. She spoke directly into it. She didn't waste time or energy attacking Haman on all kinds of levels. She targeted directly what he did, and the injustice of it. And so I think that is, something too, that in prayer and when we are in discussions with others, to stay away from veering into areas that really aren't important. You're calling out the injustice, you're targeting the injustice, and just keep it to that.
And you make a great point, Amy, that evil is evil. We live in a culture that is afraid to say anything is wrong. And so there is great courage. Part of the courage that she shows is standing up to evil and calling it what it is. This is wrong. This is evil. This is sin. This is destructive, dysfunctional, demented. I feel like we're in a culture where even as women, God might be calling you to speak up about something. And do you have the courage to stand up in a school board meeting and say, that is wrong? Right. That is evil. Do we have the courage to stand up at a family dinner and without demeaning people, but say, I'm sorry, that's wrong, in a way that's respectful? I mean, again, ask God for the strategy, and he will give you the strategy for how to approach different situations and different people. But, I feel like if we can stay in truth and love, dignity and respect, I mean, that idea of having women who know their value, who walk in dignity, who stand up in a respectful way, who treat people with honor, who serve God's purposes instead of being self-serving, demanding, rude. But it's such a beautiful, noble, and regal calling to be a respectful woman. It really is.
Such power in that, Julie. We are out of time already.
I know. How did that happen?
I know so much to pull from that story of Esther. Again, I encourage you all to get Julie's book and read what she has written about the story of Esther, Redeeming Eve, When a Woman Lives Loved. It will be, the website will be linked to the show notes as well. So thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you next week.
Yeah, thank you all. Be respectful.